Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about this thing called the buyer-seller dynamic. Whenever a buyer and seller come together for the first time, there are a couple of systems at work. The seller has a system, and that usually defines the things that we'll do and the order that we'll do them in. But the buyer has a system also that defines what they'll do and how they want to do them. So the selling side may have formal sales training or some sort of company-defined process sometimes, or they may just be winging it or doing what feels natural to them. Either way, there's usually a set of steps, a process, that goes something like this. A buyer shows some interest. We create a proposal for the buyer. We try to close the sale. We probably handle an objection or two the best we can, and that's the seller system. Does it sound familiar? But buyers are more savvy than ever before. There's so much high tech, there's so much information. They can do so much homework before they even come to us. But they don't have a formalized system like a seller should, but they've learned to work a system through life experience. Did your parents ever say, you can go to the mall, Steve, but don't buy anything? We're kind of taught from an early stage about buying and perhaps selling. So buyers do have a system, and maybe it's from their life experiences or how they've observed other buyers, professional buyers perhaps. So whenever a buyer and seller come together, there's something to consider. So put these traditional seller steps in order, if you will. There's handling objections, there's conducting a needs analysis, there's a follow-up. These are out of order, by the way, as you can see, perhaps. So what does it look like if we look at a typical seller system in a little more detail? We typically do this, don't we? We conduct our needs analysis. We ask our questions: how many, when, what color, and then we present our solution based on kind of what we've learned, right? And then what's next? Step number 3 would probably look more like close the sale. Is this something you'd like to do, or can we get a purchase order, or would you like to move forward? Whatever. And then sometimes that's when the objections come up, right? After we've presented our solution and we want to close the sale, we want to move forward, we want to do business. Well, what would step number 5 look like? That's probably the follow-up. And that's probably what happens during the follow-up. Hey, just calling to check in, Steve. And then we kind of know a little bit about what that looks like, because here's the typical buyer's order. Let's put these in order. Here's the steps: avoiding commitment, express interest, and so forth. As you see, what do they really look like in real life? Maybe a little bit more like this. Buyer expresses interest. Then they always act motivated because they want us to help them. They want pricing. They want ideas. They sound interested. Step number 3 looks like this. Then they get all the information they can. I always say they go to school on us a little bit sometimes. And then what's step 4 look like? It looks like, well, sometimes then once they get the information, there's no commitment. So we want to think it over, or we're going to take this to the committee, or no commitment. And then sometimes this think it over is disappearing. And then what do? We start chasing a little bit, don't we? Hey, Steve just called to see how you're doing. If there's been any decision made. So when we pair these two things together, it looks like this. The buyer expresses interest, and then what do? Then the seller asks questions, hopefully, and then the buyer shows more interest, perhaps, and then what do? We present our solution based on what we learned, based on the questions we ask. So there we are. We call this a perfect pairing. Maybe deadly. Maybe that's not a fair way to say it. And then the buyer gets maybe more information. They need more detail. They need for us to send a sample or do a demo, bring in more expertise, whatever it might be. Okay. And then what do? And then we do that. We jump through those hoops, don't we? Sometimes. And then we ask for the order, or we attempt to close the sale. But then what happens to the buyer in this kind of typical conversation or matchup, if you will? then the buyer might say, well, we're not quite ready, or we need more information, or got to take it to the committee, or we're going to think it over. How about we get back to you in a week or two? We've got some work to do on this. And then we see what the objection is or what the objections are, and we handle those, don't we? Or we try to. It might be fears, considerations, roadblocks, among other things. And look at and then when the buyer disappears or goes away or doesn't respond or doesn't answer emails, then we follow up and follow up and follow up and follow up. So in some cases, it's what we call unpaid consulting. I wonder, what are some of the indicators you see that may say to you, maybe this isn't a sincere buyer? Or what are some of the anecdotes or things you hear that where a buyer's protecting themselves, and we're offering more and more and more? And the possibility of unpaid consulting, where we're giving them all the information, all the advice, all the guidance, all the designs. And then I wonder who's leading that buyer-seller dance, we'll call it. One person leads and the other follows, right? So here's the methodology that we want to follow so we can change that dynamic and take a little bit of control, if you will, if that's the right word. And that's why there's a process step by step. If we go through a step by step in a project-based first time meeting, maybe not just the transaction side of it, it's going to look something like this. So the first, we build a relationship, see the blue, we engage, and that could be bonding and rapport and constructing some sort of connect questions. So we show that we're sincere and different. We differentiate ourselves more than just small talk. And then the upfront contract or the upfront agreement where we set the scene, we set the rules, excuse me. And then, there's personal chemistry and comfort built, some sort of a relationship, more than just surface if we can, and differentiating ourselves, and then positioning with some clarity. What's the purpose of the meeting? What are some of the possible outcomes? Very critical. So then the next step would be the dark blue, and we're going to do our questioning strategies, which we work on later. Discover the pain, the need, the desire, what's the hope, and talk about the investment size. What's it going to take? We're qualifying the buyer. And then the dark blue says decision-making process. That's not getting a decision. That's just finding out what's it going to take? Who's involved? Where does the decision come from? What are the steps? What are the things that you'd like to see? How does the decision come about? What's the timing? And then finally, so we've uncovered the problem. Now we've got access to funding. We know where the money's going to come from, hopefully. And there's some decision factors, aren't there, like I just described. And then finally, we get to propose our solution, but not before. Typically, we propose way too early before we've gone through the first steps. So when it does go wrong, or if we don't win, we're not sure where it went wrong. But if we follow our steps, we're going to have a pretty good idea where it might have gone wrong. Or what we need to do to make a proposal that's right on target with solving the solution. And then the post-sale typically is a lot of things, but for today's discussion, it's asking for an introduction, a referral. Who's down the hall? Is there anyone else we should meet? Who do you know? Who in your circle might be interested in a conversation like we've had? Asking for an introduction or a referral. So presenting, demo, sampling, whatever, and then onboarding, success metrics. What's it look like? What's the expectation? Is there future business that we should be talking about yet? So those are the steps. So we can almost map the reasons why we didn't win if we go through the steps in almost every situation, and every situation is different. And we don't always go through every step just exactly, but we want to know what's going on. We want to know where we stand. And we have the right to ask the right questions, fair questions, find out what's next. So here's what I'd like for you to do. Over the next week, I want you to be particularly mindful of the possibility of unpaid consulting. Does that make sense? Unpaid consulting. And see if that, look for examples when there's either insincerity or a confusion or a lack of willingness to collaborate a bit, and keep somewhat of a record of those. So here's 3 questions. What are the steps in the buyer system when they meet a salesperson? What are the 3 steps that are the most important? Is it the upfront? Is it questioning, discovering? understanding. What are the three common traps that traditional sellers fall into? I'll say one for sure is that we present too early, and that we jump through a hoop or two, and that we get involved in free consulting. And then what usually happens at the end of a traditional buyer-seller dynamic? And oftentimes, if we haven't closed the gap, there's a think it over, or there's a ghosting, or price considerations, or negotiations, recognizing, we call it recognizing this dance, if you will. So here's the overview. Sellers, we're eager to pitch, and we educate and pitch maybe too soon, and then we give away a lot of information too early and push for the close too soon. And we're more likely to accept stalls and vague interest and then follow up. And here's the buyer system. Even if it's not conscious, they avoid giving too much information, don't they? And then they get our free consulting, and then sometimes they hide the budget. Oftentimes they do. And then they avoid a decision or think it over. So their system is counterproductive to progress sometimes, isn't it? So that's something to think about today. So thanks for the time. See you next time.